Hello, hello. Welcome back to another new episode of Yarns for the Soul with Nicole. Thank you so much for coming back yet again. And if you're new, then welcome. It's my intention for this to be a safe space for anyone and everyone. And I thank you so much for joining me here. On today's episode, I have a yarn with the amazing Tyler, who shares parts of his experience with, quote, coming out and his journey navigating that. So through high school and beyond, coming out to family members. And Tyler and I both went to the same high school. So that was in small town New Zealand, rural community. So Tyler shares about his struggles trying to figure out how to live as his most authentic self in a community and in a society that didn't necessarily want him to be that version of himself. And he has a magical perspective, being able to look back on these things through a lot of struggle, a lot of hardship, a lot of darkness, and bringing gratitude to where he is now and having overcome all of those struggles. He talks about what high school life looked like for him, the process of, quote, coming out to friends and family members, and moments as a child where he would be praying to a God that he didn't necessarily believe in, asking to be different because he just wasn't happy with who he was and who he thought he was supposed to be in the world. So I'm so appreciative for Tyler sharing his story with such a rawness and openness, and really, really loved that he was motivated to share, because growing up he didn't have a lot of representation. There weren't people that looked like him in the media and TV and movies, and the fact that he, after overcoming everything now and being in a much brighter space in his journey, can now share and be that light for other people. So I'm so grateful for everything that Tyler shares, and I hope that it resonates with some of you and possibly provides the opportunity for education, expanding your knowledge base and learning about some of the paths that different people have walked. So really happy that you're here with me, and let's jump in. Hi, Tyler. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So excited to jump in, hear all of your yarns, all of your stories. You've got plenty of yarns, so we could be talking for a while.
Yeah, a lot of anecdotes. It's kind of my thing.
I love an anecdote. Tell us about, what does life look like for you now? Who are you? What are you up to?
Well, as you alluded to, my name is Tyler. I'm 30 years old. I'm swiftly
Yes.
approaching 31, so
Oh, it's
feeling
terrifying,
a little
isn't
bit
it?
over the hill. Yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of happening. I live in Invercargill in Murihiku, Southland, the bottom of New Zealand. I'm a hairstylist, so I spend most of my day kind of faffing about making people look and feel amazing, which is really cool.
Mm.
Yeah. A thankless job, I would say.
Yeah. Do you feel like a counsellor? That's what I've heard from hairdressers.
I do. It's like therapy, honestly, and it fluctuates. Like right now we're having an election going on, so
Oh
there's a
gosh, yeah.
lot of diverting the topic to try and appease the people, you know.
That just sounds exhausting. How do you kind of navigate that, especially the political stuff?
I just try my best to just try and sex, religion, politics, kind of the top three things you want to try and avoid talking about as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Weirdly, also like my three favorite things to talk about, so that does pose an issue every once in a while. But
I
no,
guess you can
you
probably
know
get a
how they've got
vibe, don't you?
100%. You know how they say there's like fight, flight, or fawn. Like
Yeah.
that's a usual trigger response. Mine is usually fawn. So I'll just say things like, "I love the color of your eyes," or "Those shoes are amazing. Where did you get those from?" Tends to be a good
When
way
in
to
doubt,
deflect,
all of the compliments.
fawn it out. Yeah, 100%. So yeah, that keeps me pretty busy
Yeah.
for the most part. Other than that, I am just your typical kind of musical theatre gay, I would say. That's my
Mm.
other great passion in life. I do
Yes,
love
you had a
to.
show earlier this year.
Earlier this year, yep, I was in the Addams
Mm.
Family in Gore. Just mincing about on the stage, frolicking, singing, dancing, acting, just being, just being a big old puff on the stage of Gore. It was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah. Was it fun?
It was amazing. It was so good.
Yeah.
It was great turnouts, great reviews, but it's one of those things that I feel like is a huge commitment that you forget how big of a commitment it is until you start doing it again.
Yeah.
And then once you start doing it, you've got to kind of keep doing it until it's over. So
Yeah.
toward the
You're
end,
like,
I'm kind of
shit,
like
I've
ready to
committed.
have my life back. Yeah, what have I done? I've done it again. But no,
Uh, like a trauma
I
bond.
was glad to see a little bit of a trauma bond. And I think the thing with musical theatre that I love so much is when you get to delve into a character or a role, it's like the perfect opportunity to just disassociate from everything else that's going on in your life. So I think that's why I kind of
Yeah.
like enjoy it so much. I get to be someone
Yeah.
else for an hour and a half on stage, sweating.
Frolicking is someone else. It does sound wonderful.
It is amazing, yeah. It's the mincing for me. I do quite enjoy it.
Yeah. Um, so if we kind of like take you back in time, you can start from wherever you want to start.
Okay.
But I guess sort of sharing your journey of coming out and particularly small town vibes. So Tyler and I went to high
Mm,
school together, for those that don't know. So we're familiar with each other, but don't know a lot of each other's journeys. So
hmm
just whatever you want to share.
Okay, so I guess I'd start by prefacing like coming out to me is I've always thought of it as quite a bizarre concept that
Mm,
society is constructed in a way that we have to do something like that.
yes. Yeah.
And it's kind of you're made to feel that by coming out inherently it's like you're different from everybody else, you know. You're the
Mm,
subsection of society that you've got to have this experience,
yeah.
this unique and unusual and kind of traumatizing experience of just first of all learning to accept who you are inside and then trying to convince the general populace that there's nothing wrong with that, you know,
Yeah.
which is yeah, traumatizing. I guess it was quite traumatizing. I think nobody has to have an experience if they're heterosexual of like having to come out to people, you know.
Mm,
When did you find out that you were heterosexual? How did your
yeah.
parents react to you
Exactly.
telling them that
Like,
you were heterosexual?
are you
So
sure you
that,
like you don't
that
want to change this? Like,
exactly, you know, have you been watching too much television and movies? Like
yeah.
you're hanging out with that weird straight kid quite often. Are you sure it's not just a fad that you've jumped onto?
Yeah, it's just a
Yeah,
phase.
just a wee phase. Yeah. And also like for me, I experienced a lot of people telling me what I was before I even knew what that meant. You know, I
Mm,
think, especially when I was a lot younger, an assumption was made, I guess, by my parents that eventually I would have that experience of coming out one day because I guess I was more fond of the tropes that society would deem as being like more feminine things. I was soft and
mm,
sensitive and I loved to dance and sing and dress up in dresses and frolic about the house and
yeah.
so I think for my parents specifically, I don't think it was any great surprise. But I still lived in fear my entire life of having to have that conversation and sit them down and say, "Hey guys, I don't know if you were aware, but I may be a
Just
little
in
bit
case you
gay."
didn't know.
Yeah,
Did you
like
eventually get to that conversation?
I did, and I wish there were so many times that I would kind of get so close to approaching the conversation with my mother specifically, and
Mm,
having that conversation with her, but I always shied away from it right at the last minute because I lived in so much fear that I would be rejected by the person that brought me into the world. Even though I think I knew
mm,
innately that that was never going to happen because my mum's so like liberal and cool and we
yeah.
got this sex chat super young, you know. And she would always say things like, if any of my kids were gay, I'd be totally fine with that, while making like direct eye contact with me as she said it. And I'm like,
Like she
oh,
knew.
yeah, but like, couldn't be me, mum. Like, that's kind of gross. Like, I think as well, because back then it wasn't something that was spoken about often at all
Mm,
in any situation. And if it was brought up and spoken about, there was always such a negative connotation involved with it, that it was this bad thing, or that I would hear stories of people coming out and they would have all their shit tossed out into the driveway and burnt by their parents, and they were, ostracized
yeah.
from their family. And so I lived with a great deal of fear that that was going to happen to me, even though I knew that that wasn't going to be the way that it was going to go for me. It
Mm,
was a terrifying prospect. And so I feel like the first person I had to come out to really was myself. And
mm, yeah.
that was, yeah, that was a whole traumatic experience in and of
Mm,
itself. I remember there were two kinds of Tyler when I was really young. I would either be
mm,
in my room, locked away, sobbing and saying to God, like, please, I will believe in you if I wake up in the morning and I'm not like this. Like, I'll do
mm,
anything to not be like this.
yeah.
And then the other Tyler was making a beautiful dress out of a bed sheet in front of the mirror, just like posing and fluffing about and feeling such a euphoria in that moment of being
Mm.
authentically myself. And the
Is
weird
that just
dichotomy of
it's coexisting? Yeah.
it was such an interesting dichotomy of like being so euphoric about this part of myself that was so natural, and then so dysphoric about how the other people's perception made me feel about that
Mm,
euphoria, if that makes sense. It
yeah,
was a
and I
really
mean,
difficult thing to.
you say like, that's such a like such depressing image of like a child or a young, young teenager on their knees being like asking God to make them different because they don't like the way that they are, or society's told them that
Mm,
there's something wrong with that. Like, were you from a
mm.
religious background at all? Did that inform
Not
that
in
sort of
any way,
thought?
shape, or form. No, we were very, I would say, the opposite of religious. But I felt
Mm,
like if anybody, it was like I think for me, it was like a last ditch attempt. Like I'd tried everything else. That maybe if there was this
mm,
overreigning power up there somewhere that had all of this might, that maybe if I promised him that I would start to believe in that whole world,
mm,
if with the return payment that he would change who I was inside, then I was ready to go all
mm,
in on that, you know, and turn to
yeah.
faith of some kind. I guess I don't know. It's such an interesting concept to me now, but it seems like so many years ago that I was dealing with it.
It's interesting how religion can even play a part in that. And I think the area that we grew up in was, it probably still is, quite conservative. And I think, yeah, I
Mm.
remember, yeah, feeling like, why are we like being taught religion in schools? And we're like, why
Bible in
do I have to
schools. Do you
believe
remember
this?
that? Primary school?
Yes.
Bible in schools. Like,
I
wow.
didn't choose
That's,
this, but okay.
yeah, that's crazy to me that that was happening. And I think, like, without religious figures in the community saying that in so many words, it was definitely like an overbearing kind of feeling that
Mm.
was kind of put out. I remember actually one of the first people I ever came out to was the guidance counselor
Oh,
at
right.
high school, because I was
Mm.
having a super, super tough time battling with
Yeah.
this, you know, this part of myself. And so to come out to him in this like safe space was something that took me a lot of courage at the time. And I said, you know what, I'm
Mm.
like, man, I'm gay. Like, holy, I'm gay.
Mm.
And he said,
What does it mean?
if he said, and I can remember this almost verbatim, if my son came home and
Mm.
told me he was gay, I'd be really disappointed. And so I plucked up
What?
all of the courage I could muster to tell someone that was like, that was a designated safe space for me, and to
Yes.
be, and for that to come back to me, I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to tell
Yeah.
anybody
There's no
this.
safe spaces anymore.
No safe spaces. And that, I think at that point for me, that's when the suicidal ideation really started to kick in at that point. And I was
Mm.
terrified that someone somehow, unbeknownst to myself, was going to find out this part of me, and that my only option was that I would have to end my own life, because there was no role models in our community then either. I feel
Mm,
like anyone that was of the spicy variety tended to kind of leave as soon as they could in order to like find that part of their life. When they went to university or moved overseas for their OE,
mm,
like that's when they started to
yeah,
have that
embrace it.
experience for themselves. And so I
Mm,
didn't see there was no way forward for me at that point because there was no one in my community that I could look to as a visible member and see that like I can do this and I will be okay and it's gonna be fine. Yeah, which is so
and
sad.
I guess I know, and having like thinking back, like even figures on like TV programs and stuff, it's sort of this interesting part of society that you don't often think about, but the importance of
Mm,
representation, even like ads that you see on TV, and looking at
yeah.
those people and being like, none of those are me, therefore, do I not fit? Do I not exist in society?
100%. And also just on the same note there, those figures that I did see in TV and movies, they were
Mm,
very stereotypical gay people that were generally the camp best friend or kind of the laughing stock, the
mm,
butt of the joke. When you think about shows like Will and Grace or
yeah.
even like watching things like Friends, and there was a lot of transphobic and homophobic jokes that were made there. Like, look, watching Friends
Yes.
now to me is like a fever
Oh,
dream.
it's terrifying rewatching it. I'm like, I had so many good
Oh yeah,
associations with it, and now it's ruined.
I know. I remember like watching that like with the family, like like laughing, and oh, this is like the most amazing show. But looking back, it's like you would be cancelled right now. Monica's
Yes.
fat suit, like you could never.
Oh, I know. So how old were you when you had that conversation with the guidance counselor?
I was probably about, I would say, uh, probably when I just turned 15, I would say.
Mm,
And I only know that because I came out to my closest friends probably toward the end of my 15th year. And
yeah.
that was kind of that's what kind of got the ball rolling for me in this coming out experience. And this is another
Mm,
interesting thing about coming out that I think if you're not part of the community, you probably haven't put much thought toward. But coming out isn't something that you have to do
mm,
one time. First, you've got to come out to
yeah.
yourself and learn to like love who you are. Then you come out to your family or your friends, whatever comes first there, and then every
Mm,
single space you enter after that, in some way or another, whether it be consciously or subconsciously, you're having to come out again to figure out if you're
mm,
being accepted in that environment, if you're being just tolerated in that environment, or if that creepy guy in the corner wants to give you the bash. There's all these contingency
yeah.
plans you've got to think through. And that's a constant thing. And even
Yeah.
to the, like, I'm 30 years old and I'm coming out every day. It's exhausting.
That's the thing. I'm like, it just sounds exhausting. And as a teenager as well, like trying to figure out life at the best of times, but then that being in those social settings, just you're under constant stress. Like it's
Mm.
unhealthy.
Uh, Absolutely. And I feel as well, they're such formative years, and you're being barraged with all of these hormones through puberty that are just making you just, it's a
Mm,
clusterfuck just as it is. And then having to deal with this whole extra layer of like, of adult problems that children shouldn't have to deal with. It's just
yeah.
like the cherry on top. Really difficult thing to kind of deal with.
Yeah. You talk about like coming out to yourself first. Was there sort of a moment or a process of things when you realized like you were okay with that and then you're gonna take the next step and choose who you're gonna come out to next?
Yeah, I think it was more of a case of I'd exhausted every avenue to try and I was
Mm,
tired of trying to change that. I
yeah.
guess I became quite nihilistic in my views about that and that
Mm,
nothing is working. And I'm not waking up every morning and choosing to be this. Like this is so innate and within my being and inside my psyche, and it's
mm,
just I think I just grew to accept that I can't do anything about this anymore. I was tired of being sad. I was tired of crying. I was tired of praying. I was
mm,
tired of pretending to be something that I wasn't. And so I thought
mm.
one day, I guess I just kind of woke up one morning and said, fuck this, man. Like, fuck this. I'm going to get
Yeah.
out there and just do it. Rip the band aid off, I
Just
suppose, as well.
just embrace it. But that's also a really brave choice. And like after, as you said, like you kind of reached that point from a nihilistic process because you tried
Mm.
everything else to change and it didn't work. and then having to
Yeah.
step out and be like, okay, this is me.
Yeah. Yeah. I also felt like at the time that because I was so early into the journey of like my self acceptance, I guess, and discovering who I
Mm,
was, that it was difficult to put a label on what I even was, like whether it was that I was
mm,
gay or that I was bi, or there were moments that I thought
yeah,
that I was trans, or there was so many, and
mm.
because I didn't have, like, if you think back to sex ed in high school, like it was very,
It was
very,
ridiculous.
it was crazy. I remember there was a moment at intermediate school when we were watching one of those creepy cartoon videos about sex
Oh
education,
gosh.
and the
Yeah.
segment came up about masturbation, which is, as
Mm,
we all know now, completely normal and kind of everyday
mm,
thing for most people.
yeah.
But the teacher at the time paused the video as fast as she could, fast forwarded through the entire thing, and said, "We don't need to learn about any of this," you know. And that was
Oh my
masturbation,
gosh.
and that was, and the shame and stigma that kind of comes along with that
Mm,
when it's just discovering your own body by yourself.
yeah,
Like we never spoke
exactly.
about homosexuality at all, ever, or trans, or
Mm,
non-binary, or anything that was difficult or
yeah.
uncomfortable for teachers to talk about. We never talked about it, and if we did talk about it, it was certainly not something that was positive. It was very, very negative. And so when you're hearing that from teachers and
Mm,
from your fellow peers, like coming out into that environment, especially in Southland, which is a super, super conservative province, like it made other people's reactions to homosexuality made me terrified of saying that, actually, like putting my hand up, like, guys, they might be talking about me. you know?
yeah. It's like all of that kind of teachers and adult figures that you've got around you are kind of saying you're not allowed to exist in this world the way that you are. Did you have what
Ex-
was the response from like peers, and you said coming out to your friends as well? How did that kind of go?
Well, I was very fortunate to be surrounded by like a beautiful and strong woman right off the bat. I had always kind of
Mm,
found myself um, being closer to the girls, I think because I was never involved in any of the rough and tumble or the dirt and sports and rugby, obviously. Like it just wasn't for me.
yeah.
It never has been. It still brings me absolutely no joy.
Same.
And so I was, and because in myself, I have this very powerful kind of femininity that I really aligned myself with powerful women right off the bat at a
Mm,
very early age. And the women that I chose to align myself with were very loving and nurturing and understanding and intelligent and tolerant. And
mm,
so, and again, had already kind of assumed, I guess, that there was this fruity nature that came along with me as well.
yeah.
But I still had to have the
Mm,
conversation because for years and years, even though they came to me with love and asked me if I was, I would
all
still
right.
vehemently deny that I was, because I guess not so much fear of or shame of how they would feel about me, but you
Mm,
know how high school operates and how news travels quickly, especially that
yeah.
kind of news. I wasn't ready for that to
Oh,
be
yeah.
something that spread throughout all of my peers, and I knew that as much as those girls loved me and I loved them, talk is cheap, and people do love a wee goss. So I was
Yeah.
terrified that I was going to become, the hot topic.
Mm,
So I remember the exact moment that I came out to my first friend.
yeah.
I'd stolen a bottle of Maker's Mark bourbon from my stepdad, and we were at their house and we were blind drunk. I was just about 16 years old. Should not
Yeah.
have been drinking at all. And in a moment of inebriated weakness, I just turned to her and said, "Hey, girl, like, I'm gay."
Yeah.
And she obviously was not surprised at all. But another
Yeah.
friend was asleep on the couch. Well, I assume she was asleep, but she was listening in. So
Mm,
I inadvertently came out to two people instead of just one. And then
right.
by the next Monday, the entire high school had kind of caught wind of it.
Mm,
Yeah. And
yeah.
then I think at that point as well, because I was school had become such a difficult place for me to be, just with the attitudes and the energy of the other people
Mm.
around me, that I'd already kind of like checked out from the school
Yeah.
experience. I spent a lot of time smoking in the back paddock, skipping classes,
Yeah.
because I didn't feel comfortable. I was capable. I was more than capable. I was extremely
Mm.
intelligent at high school.
Yeah.
My grades did wane, I guess, when I started to enjoy the environment a little less. But I
Mm.
certainly, I think at that point I was ready to leave. I was ready to get myself out of that kind of muddy situation that I found high school to be. And
Yeah.
so I remember that Monday at school, a boy came up to me in the paddock and he said, "Are you gay?" And I just said, "Yes." And at that
Yeah.
point, I could not have cared less at that point, I don't think, because I was so over it, you know. I was so over being
Mm.
ostracized by these people who, like, I meant nothing to them, and so they meant nothing to me. And so these people
Mm.
had spent years saying that I was gay and calling me awful things and pushing me around. And so
Mm.
fessing up and just saying, yeah, you know, are you happy now? Yes, I am gay. There it is. You know, it was
Yeah.
at that point, it was a bit of a non-issue for me. I was like, whatever,
Yeah.
do with that
Like, let's
information
move
what you
on.
will. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like,
Just accept
surprise.
this and move on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't make
Yeah.
life at school any easier for me, but it didn't make it any
Mm.
harder either, because people already assumed that about me, and so it was just,
Mm.
yeah, I just said the words out loud finally instead of saying, "Oh no, I'm not."
Mm.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I mean, you touched on that guy in particular having already like constantly been making comments anyway and bullying you. What was your sort of past experience with bullying and stuff in high school? Like, I guess obviously a super depressing topic, but like, what did the worst of it kind of look like?
I think for me, at that age, when you are, I guess this kind of reverts back to the fact that we didn't have a lot of in-depth sexual education at school. A lot of the sex
Mm.
ed you learnt was on the playground, and a lot
Yeah.
of that came with misinformation and bias and just general, you know, yeah, people just didn't really know what they were talking about
Yeah.
so much, and so also, I don't think people really realized, and I was absolutely guilty of this myself. As someone that got like so badly bullied, I did a lot of bullying to anyone that I felt was lower than me on the food chain, just to kind of,
Mm.
which I feel terrible about now, obviously. But I think that's just a natural response in that situation, that you just like,
Yeah.
if you can take the drama away from you and push it onto somebody else, that's going to make it a little bit easier for you to like
Mm.
tolerate that
Exactly.
kind of stuff. But yeah, like words have weight, and looking back now, like these kids that used to taunt me and jeer at me and, you know, say things in the changing room while we were doing PE, like, "Oh, Tyler's in there, all bums to the walls, don't look at my dick," while they were all like tucking
Mm.
their penis between their legs and making vaginas, like that was the most heterosexual thing that's ever happened, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't blame them, because they didn't know. They weren't informed enough. They didn't have those
Mm.
conversations at home. They didn't have them at school. There was no opportunity for them to be educated about any of this stuff. And so, while at the time it was like
Mm.
god awful, I don't look back now, you know, with, yeah, any kind of like resentment or anger. For me, it's more like sadness that we didn't live in a society then where we could have open conversations about things that were so inherently natural and normal. But I certainly
Mm.
didn't enjoy feeling othered by those people at the time. I was
Yeah.
never beaten, or, you know, I was pushed around or whatever, but I was never like beaten up for being gay. I don't think anyone at our high school was ever really beaten up for anything. Um,
Mm.
but it was just the words and the actions and the segregation, I suppose, and not being involved and not
Mm.
being allowed
Mm.
into those male dominated spaces, or not being able to have a chance to justify my existence to anybody without just being put into a easy box of this kid's. And I guess as well, in the same way that I did, there were a lot of kids that focused their energy onto me because they wanted the energy to be taken away from themselves. And so it's a very vicious,
Mm.
cyclical, very prepubescent hormonal high school kind of activity to be engaging with, I suppose.
Yeah,
And
like all
everyone
of
took
the
part.
layers. You're so right. It's like they're
Mm,
deflecting their own stuff, even if they're like the quote popular kids. But I think it's such an interesting point that you said, like, and it's amazing that you can kind of look back with any sort of kindness as like they didn't know any better, they weren't informed. But then you kind of take away those layers and then realize, well, they still couldn't treat you with kindness at the time because that was the way that they were brought up. That was our society. And you'd
mm.
kind of hope that we've moved on, that even if you don't understand or if you're not informed, you can still approach other people with kindness and curiosity and be happy to learn about them. But we didn't have that, apparently.
We just didn't really have it. And I feel, and I haven't always looked back on that with,
Mm,
kindness. It's taken years and years and years and years of dismantling this kind of, and
yeah.
self-hatred as well. Like, imagine being told every single day how awful of a person you are just for existing, like, while you're trying to find out who you are and grow as a person. Like that, at
Mm,
the time, I just convinced myself I didn't care, but it would stack sediment on sediment on sediment of things that now later in my life has slowed me down with having to dig through all of that mud that was put on my name just for being a
mm.
human being.
Just existing as you are.
Just trying to mince about, girl.
It's like, just let me mince. That's all I want to
Let me
do.
mince. Let me frolic.
Um, so you left high school early? Did you?
I left early.
Yeah,
I got to the start of year 12. I just turned 16 and I thought, yeah,
yeah,
nah, gotta go.
yeah.
It wasn't for
We're done.
me. I wasn't
Yeah.
attending my classes anyway. Leaving high school for me was interesting, actually. I
Mm.
didn't really, I was called into a meeting with a rector who
Oh.
had notes from all of my teachers for all of my period subjects
Oh.
about, I guess, my behaviours in their classes, or the fact that I wasn't going to their
Mm.
classes. And
Yeah.
it was kind of like a torrent of Tyler's not applying himself. Tyler
Mm.
doesn't seem to be enjoying school. Perhaps Tyler would be better off if he. It was kind of like a gentle push to, this
Mm.
is clearly not working for you. Perhaps you should look into another avenue and get into
Oh,
the workforce
okay.
or something. Yeah, so I had a meeting with my mum and my stepdad with the rector, and
Mm.
he read out all these things, and at that point I was at the crux of kind of wanting to get out anyway, and that was for me the
Mm.
final round that was like, okay, they don't want me to be here, I might as well just go. So I decided to leave and
Mm.
took my little sheet around all of my period teachers' classes and got them to sign my release and everything. And every teacher would say, "Oh, you would have done so well, like, we're so sad to see you going." Meanwhile, I've just had this barrage of like, I'm like, "Excuse me, I've just heard the rector's just told me exactly what." Anyway, and so I
But
gapped it
it's
and I
like,
was like, "Gotta go."
yeah, but like they say, you're not applying yourself or you're not enjoying the environment. And it's like, well, you're the teacher. You kind of contribute to creating this environment, and you were obviously very intelligent. And it
Mm,
wasn't for like lack of intelligence at all. It's just the environment. But I'm like, well, you can change that. So,
exactly, and there were teachers that would say, I guess teachers that kind of um, saw what was going on, I suppose. There were definitely a
mm,
couple of teachers that could kind of see what was happening, saw that I guess that I was falling through the cracks, but
yeah.
I guess didn't have didn't know how to say the right thing to kind of catch me from falling, I suppose. There were
Mm,
teachers that said, if you manned up a little bit, you'll probably find yourself in a more comfortable situation. If you just like butched up a
mm,
little. One teacher said, actually, this was really interesting. My drama teacher said to me at the end of a class one day, she pulled me aside and said, You're quite camp, aren't you? You're quite camp." And I didn't know what camp meant, you know. I was like 16.
how was that a helpful
I'd
comment anyway?
never heard that verbiage before in my life. And so I thought it was a compliment. And I was just like, yeah, thanks. Yeah, I guess I am.
Why,
And it
thank
wasn't
you.
until years later that I realized what that word meant, that I thought, oh, that woman was like calling me out for being kind of spicy in a roundabout kind of way. Bizarre.
That's so odd. And you'd think, I mean, drama, you'd hope that that is kind of a safe space to be flamboyant, be spicy, be whatever you want to be, because you're playing different
Mm.
characters and all of that.
And that was my safer space at high school, honestly. I loved that drama room. I loved the escapism
Mm.
of being able to go there, and not only just for myself, but being in that small, tight-knit kind of class where everybody had chosen to do that
Mm.
subject and everybody had a willingness to kind of strip back those layers and get like and become somebody else. It was the most comfortable part of my whole high school experience, and I think that's what encouraged me to get into theatre in the first place, because I realised that that was a tool that I could use to kind of get away
Mm.
from my day-to-day life and focus on pretending to be something that was more palatable for people, I suppose.
Your escapism.
My
Um,
escapism.
what did what did life look like after you left school? So you stayed in Gore. Were you still living at home and stuff?
I stayed in Gore. I was still living at home. This is where the heavier trauma starts to kind of come in, if we're ready to embrace that.
I'm here for it. You share whatever you're comfortable with sharing. We'll add a trigger warning for everyone. So
Yeah,
go in as deep as you
right.
like.
Amazing. So just after I left school, maybe a couple of months after I left school, I was still living at home. My stepfather, who raised me since I was like I think 3 years old, ended up taking his own
Mm.
life, which was I was already in this massive tumultuous space of like trying to figure out what was
Mm.
going on, and then this tragedy kind of unfolded that
Mm.
just added so much extra, like a huge extra layer to what was going on. And I think the hardest part about that for me, apart from obviously seeing how it just destroyed my family unit and how
Mm.
deeply that affected the people that I loved the most and myself, was
Mm.
that I had never felt, I wasn't at that point yet that I was ready to tell my parents that part of myself.
Okay.
And
Mm.
so I definitely lived with a lot of regret for not being able to share that with him while he was still alive. And
Mm.
he was like a bloke, he was like a contractor, a farmer, like a real
Mm.
southern bloke. And I never got to experience his acceptance. I think that would have been a really powerful thing for me at that time, to have a
Mm.
really strong male figure in my life hug me and say, I love you, and
Mm.
you know, you are who you are, and that's fine. I don't know that that would have been his reaction. I can't say. I hope that it would have been. I assume that it would
Yeah.
have been. I think he was an absolutely amazing man. Um, but that's something that I never got to share because I was so, just in this weird shell about like not wanting my parents to feel some type of way about me, I suppose.
And
And then
especially being
also,
such a bloke and so masculine, you'd be kind of extra worried about what the response is, even though he's like clearly raised you and he's loved you for however
mm,
many years.
but it would have been such a powerful and healing thing for me. I think at that time
Mm.
specifically, when I was at that age and I was dealing with those huge emotions, to have someone like that,
Mm.
just that would have made it so much easier for me, I think, at that time for myself.
Yeah.
Also, because I and very, very soon after that happened, actually, that was when I ended up coming out to my mum,
Mm.
because I didn't I didn't spend a lot of time at home after that happened, because my home was a very upsetting place to be.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time out drinking and doing drugs and being promiscuous and trying to
Mm.
catch up on the things that I'd missed out on prior to. So I was a bit of a mongrel, I would say, for want of a better word, at that time. And
And
I
I
moved
guess you're
out into my
processing.
I had a lot going on, a lot going
Yeah.
on. So I ended up texting my mum one night when I was really drunk, and I told her that I was bisexual because I thought that may soften the blow a little bit, which I think is quite a common
Okay.
thing for
Yeah.
queer people to do. Yeah, I was like, maybe if she
It's the
thinks she
first
might
step.
get a grandkid from me one day, like that may be more palatable.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, and me shaking as I'm like sending this text message, like, oh my god, like waiting
Yeah.
for a response, like what is going to happen? But yeah, she was obviously super, super chill about it and kind of gave me that I've known for years. I thought you were going to be gay or you were going to be trans. I wasn't sure when it was going to happen, but I knew it was going to happen. Like, thank you for
Mm,
feeling comfortable and telling me this. Like, I love you.
oh,
She said she feared for my personal safety more than anything else and how other people would perceive my
mm,
sexuality and what that meant for my safety, my whether I was going to be the victim of violence when I was out
mm,
gallivanting around. Whether I was going to contract HIV was a big concern for her as well. I think as well
mm,
because she grew up during the AIDS crisis, or the tail end of the
yeah.
AIDS crisis, and so she wasn't overly educated in this kind of stuff either, and that was like one of her major concerns at the time. But at that time, although that was a good conversation and it went well, I wasn't
Mm,
able to receive the support that I needed from my family at that time because they were dealing with this overbearing situation that was so
mm,
much bigger than
yeah.
the kid that we always assumed was gay just saying it out loud. you
Yeah.
know, I didn't have that. I knew I was loved and I was supported, but
Mm,
everyone was so broken. They had nothing to
yeah.
offer me at that
To
time,
give. Yeah.
nothing to give me, and so it was another situation where just like before, I the duty fell on myself to kind of help myself through that as well, if that makes sense. Even
Like
helping myself
constantly
through the
picking yourself
grieving
up.
process.
Mm, like you've got
Mm,
so many things going on. How do you like
mm.
how on earth do you make it through that? Like it's amazing that you've made it through because not everyone would under those circumstances.
I can't believe that I made it through, and I feel like a lot of that was due
Mm,
in part to probably dissociation because it was so unbearable that
yeah.
I couldn't take the time to work
Mm,
through any big issues. It all felt a little bit like too much for me at the time, and so I did what I did at the time, which was numb those big feelings by
mm,
constantly being drunk or experimenting with drugs and
mm,
trying to busy myself with addiction instead of just sitting down and fosking
yeah.
through big feelings. I wasn't ready to
Yeah.
do that yet. I'd spent so many
Yeah.
years doing it as well, and I just wanted a
Mm,
break. And I think at that time I discovered that drugs and alcohol for me was something that gave me the break. I didn't have to think about it because I was just out of my mind all the time,
mm. It's like you needed
which is
a
not.
break. Like the break itself is healthier, but it's like the way that you go about it. But often like that's
Mhm.
such a thing is you want to just forget or you want to numb things and that's how we end up with addiction.
Yeah, I think it's a very. I followed the path of least resistance in that case, and that
Mm,
the drugs and alcohol provided me very little to no resistance. And
mm,
so, just like water, I followed it, and it was easier. I knew at the time when I was doing it as well that I was putting off the inevitable and that one day I would
yeah.
have to sit down and deal with big issues.
Yeah.
Um, and I knew that I was exacerbating the issues by adding more trauma. A lot of people, if you've been through addiction, it is, especially if you get quite deep into heavy addiction with like hard drugs or whatever, it's
Mm,
you're opening yourself up to one trauma after the other. The people that you associate with, the yeah, using depressants and stimulants and then depressants and then stimulants. It's like for
mm,
your mental well being, it's like a roller coaster. And when your mind is so fragile already, and you already have a
mm.
predisposition to mental health issues, it does not do the mind any good, which I come to
No.
discover later on.
How long how long did that kind of become like a main part of your life? Was that sort of a years long thing to sort of just numb until you were ready to process?
Yeah, it was years and years and years. I'd say
Mm,
from about 16. It started with things like marijuana, which I guess people most usually 16, 17, 18-year-olds, you'd experiment with it.
mm,
And drinking, obviously. But I
yeah.
did that all in excess because of my addictive personality and just trying to cope with the trauma. And that was the only thing that was kind of
Mm,
helping. And that eventually led on to more frequent use of harder drugs up until I was about, I would say, into my yeah, until I was about 20 or so, until I started to think that, hey, this is probably not the healthiest way to be coping with this, and I should probably do a bit of reflection now instead of just trying to suffocate these emotions. Yeah.
And were you working full time and stuff at that time as well? Like that sort of overlap?
Oh, yeah. Yep, super high functioning addict
Mm.
at the time.
Yeah.
Super high functioning anxiety, super high functioning depression. I think it's like a trope of my personality that I like, and this is probably because of my undiagnosed ADHD as well, that the
Yeah.
busier I keep myself, and I
Mm.
still do it now. Obviously now I do passion projects or things that bring me joy. I don't rely on substances to get me through. I do always kind of have something in the works. I've got a project on the go. I've got a show happening.
Mm.
I'll sit down and write music. There's always something going
Yeah.
on to distract me from
Yeah.
if I start to slow down, big feelings start to come up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like working through those feelings. So you working full time in Gore, what was it like being out in the community? What were your experiences like kind of as a young adult?
Right. So yeah, I think once I had come out and I'd ripped the plaster off and I
Mm.
was becoming more comfortable being authentically myself, I leaned very heavily into um, I guess characteristics that one would think are pretty stereotypical of a gay person. When it
Mm.
came to like fashion and makeup, and I was like an emo kid, so my hair was black with turquoise strips in it, and I wore salmon colored skinny jeans and studded belts and Doc Martens and stuff like that. Like,
Yeah.
I was
Love it.
in a place that I at that point I did not care. I was free at that point.
Yeah.
You couldn't. I'd cried so many tears, there were none left to
Mm.
cry, and so I didn't waste time feeling sadness or scared or fear of judgment at
Mm.
that time. I leaned in really, really heavy to kind of prove a point to other people that I just didn't care. Like, I'm just
Yeah.
doing me. Yeah. Which was fulfilling at the time as well. I definitely still copped flack from the community. I also felt like at that time that I felt very much only gay in the village, although I certainly
Mm.
wasn't. But I was quite promiscuous, I would say. I was sleeping with a lot of closeted men, which opened my eyes up
Uh,
to the reality that in that small conservative
yeah.
place, there were a lot of people like me, but nobody
Mm.
except for me wanted to be honest and truthful about their existence. And so I copped so
Mm.
much flack from everybody, even though I knew that I wasn't alone. I was just
Yes.
the only person that was brave enough to be like, this is who I am.
Isn't that
Like
so
I think,
sad that there's all these other people out there, but you're one of the only people that are brave enough, whatever the right word is, to kind of live in that truth day to day.
mm. And also, and those kind of people would join in on the bullying and
Mm,
the laughing and the hateful rhetoric and
yeah.
stuff if I was at a pub or whatever. And I'm thinking the whole time, like, hold on. Like, this
Like,
guy's
I know.
been sliding into my DMs for months trying to get a piece, you know? Like, what's going like,
So you're
that's a
not
very
hiding from
bold
me.
move. Yeah, exactly. Crazy, crazy time. But yeah,
um,
I, I, I waned out of that, though, at the time. I kind of like, not that I butched up, but I felt like I leaned very heavy into the stereotypes just because I felt like that's what I had to do as a gay person and that's what gay people were like because that's what I saw, in movies and television. That's what I assumed
mm,
that I would have to be effeminate and that's what that meant for me, like being gay.
mm,
And then later I realized that actually I can just be a human being and be myself and I don't need to put on a show of any kind.
yeah.
It's not for other people, it's for myself. Um,
Mm,
and that's kind of when the Gore ambassador thing ended up rolling around. I kind of curbed the
yes.
drugs and
I'm so
alcohol.
intrigued by this. Yeah.
Yeah, so for anyone that doesn't know about the Gore District Ambassador, it was a competition that they held annually um, to yeah, it was like a judged competition, quite formal, to pick a
Mm.
person that would be chosen to represent the district for the, well, just the district as a whole, I suppose, but also for the Country Music Awards, and then be
Mm.
sent to Tamworth in New South Wales, Gore's sister city, to represent Gore at their country music festival. And I had a friend that was the previous ambassador,
Mm.
and she said to me, you'd be so good," because I'd done
Yeah.
so many shows and I was very comfortable in public speaking and being on stage and in front of people. And I thought, how ironic would it be if the guy that had been spat on in the street for just being himself ended
Yeah.
up winning this competition and representing this entire district on
Yeah.
a provincial kind of level, you know? And I knew
Mm.
as soon as I filled in my application that I was going to win that. I just knew it because I
You knew.
I know,
Confident.
so confident. But when I put my mind to something, if it's going to distract me from feeling these big feelings, I'm going to work my ass
It's
off
true.
to
Yeah, it's a good
do it. And
project.
I just knew that this it was would be so funny for me to fulfill this project. And I did. I ended up cleaning it up, and I ended up
Mm.
becoming chosen as the ambassador of Gore, which I thought was incredible, incredible at the time.
Do
And
you think like
so,
any part of that was a kind of weird political move at all by the judges or anything like that, being like, "We look at us, we're so inclusive," kind of thing?
no, I don't. I don't think so. I don't know. It's kind
Mm.
of hard to say. I feel like I would like to
Yeah.
assume that I won it on my own merits, and that
Yeah.
wasn't.
Exactly.
I certainly didn't use my space in the community or in the rainbow community to try and ledger that win for myself. I
Mm.
almost made it a point not to bring it up at all because I didn't want it to be a
Mm.
disadvantage, I think, and I was so set on winning it.
Yeah.
Because I knew that having that platform and being visible in the community as a member of the rainbow community would be such a
Mm.
powerful thing, not only for my healing and a very full circle moment for me, but if I, as a young person, had seen that, that would have been the role model that I was like, okay, I can do this, you know? And so it
Mm.
was a very
Like
full circle moment for me.
exactly what you needed, like you became that person, which is, yeah, so powerful.
Mm. And it was iconic, and I ran around and I minced around and I did so much public speaking, and it was such a weird experience looking back now. It was like a fever dream, I suppose, at the time, but my main job was to gas Gore up, I suppose, and talk about
Yeah.
how incredible this community was and what it had to
Mm.
offer, not only within
The
its own
irony.
community, but yeah, it was
Oh.
bizarre. And as I was doing it, it felt so wrong because of my experience
Mm.
within the community, but it also felt so right because as much as I had big feelings about the way that people treated me in Gore, I'm still
Mm.
very like I love Gore as a place,
Yeah.
as where I grew up. It's a beautiful place to live. It's
Mm.
got absolutely everything you need in regards to
Yeah,
like
exactly.
facilities. You know, it's if there's a crisis in the community honestly rallies so hard and fast around people that
Mm.
need help, and it's the most uplifting and beautiful and joyous place to be. But I also acknowledge that there is a very dark, seedy kind of underbelly to Gore where it comes to conservative racism and misogyny, homophobia,
Mm.
transphobia. Um, yeah, it's like there's two sides to the coin, and I'm so proud of representing Gore. And every time I go
Yeah.
back to Gore, I think of that moment that I won that competition that night and how how good that felt inside that I was representing that place. But
Yeah. How
also,
did
I feel. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. How did that year go? Did you sort of use that platform as a way of educating people? Um, what did you
I
sort of choose
didn't,
to do with that voice?
yeah, I didn't want to create. If I had won that this year in the space that I
Mm.
am now, I absolutely would have taken that and ran with it and used that
Yeah.
as an opportunity to educate and create acceptance for the LGBTQIA plus community 100%. But at that time,
Mm.
I didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to soapbox with that
Yeah.
because I didn't run through that competition with that being something that I had
Mm.
planned on doing, and I was already kind of uncomfortable with putting gore, like romanticizing gore in that way. I didn't want to join the
Mm.
two things together because I didn't want to do a disservice to myself and I didn't want to do a disservice to the community. It was a very kind of grey
Mm.
situation that I just did not want to be dipping my toes into at that time.
Mm. So, what did it sort of involve being the ambassador? You did some trips to Australia and stuff?
Yep, I went to Tamworth in New South Wales and went to their country music festival, which is an absolutely incredible experience. And if you're into country music, like you've honestly got to do it. It was
Mm.
40-degree heat was homophobic, but it was an amazing experience. And within the district, I did a lot of public speaking engagements, award ceremonies. I did a lot of public speaking, which I love. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did a lot. It was just like a
Do you,
Comedy Central roast the entire time, though. Like, I'm pretty sure all I did was just crack one joke after the next. And honestly, that's been something that I've used my entire life to make myself more palatable to people. Like, be the class clown, make people laugh. If they're laughing at me, they're not, you know, doing whatever else
mm,
they're going to be doing to me. And so
yeah.
the majority of people loved it. Like, they thought I was doing a great job.
Yeah. How did it change, like, the way that you experienced the community after your year was up?
It was a very cathartic and healing experience for me, just
Mm.
knowing that I'd set my mind to it and I'd done it, and that I was chosen on my own merit to
Mm.
represent the district, and that I had done a good job of it, and
Yeah.
that there were going to be big shoes to fill for the next person that was going to do it. And I saw a different side to the community as well. I don't know if it just meant that I was
Mm.
mingling with another part of the community, maybe,
Yeah.
probably. It was a different side to all
Yeah.
that I was seeing. It was kind of like the upper middle class farmers' wives kind of stuff that
Mm.
I'd kind
Right.
of, yeah, not really been too privy to. So it was beautiful. I loved it.
Mm.
So proud of myself for doing that, and I'm proud of Gore
Mm.
for being. Not that I was chosen because I was gay, but it was a very progressive thing to do, and there was some kickback with it within the community that I did hear about. But I
Mm.
was like killing it, so it didn't bother me.
Like, I don't care.
I'm like, look at me mince.
How did you feel, like, those spaces that you went into that you may have not otherwise been in before, like, as you said, upper middle class? Um, did you feel what they were they safe spaces for you?
I don't think I've ever felt like there was a space in that community that was 100% a safe space for me. I
Mm.
feel like there's a difference between acceptance and tolerance, and I feel
Mm.
like we may dress up how uh, I don't know if progressive's the word I want to use, but how far Gore has come over the years as being a place where they accept people like me.
Mm.
They certainly have got better at tolerating people like me, but
Yeah.
tolerance for me has never been enough. I don't
Mm.
think it makes me feel icky that I'm in a space where people won't say anything, but they'll think it, you know?
Mm. Yeah. It's like the spectrum between tolerance and acceptance, and maybe they're slowly moving along, but it's still very much in the we're just tolerating you and not actually acknowledging it or accepting you into this space
Yes,
as you are.
absolutely. And I feel like we
Mm.
have these regressions as well. We, I
Mm.
like to think that New Zealand is like 5 years behind the world, right? And then Gore is like five
Yeah.
years behind New Zealand. So we've got a lot of catching up to do in that regard. And I also feel like we get to these moments and I see these moments and I'm like, oh my God, thank God. Like when I see this next generation growing up, I'm so grateful for the space
Mm.
that Gen Z has created and
Yeah.
just the blind acceptance of diversity and uniqueness and how beautiful and joyous that is to have within a small community like Gore. But then things come about from time to time where I feel like we have a little mini regression,
Mm.
big things happen that make me think, yikes, man, like we're still not there. Like uh, during election time, the trans woman in bathroom situation comes along,
Yeah.
and it affects the entire community. And I can't speak on trans issues because I'm not trans, but it affects the entire community because we're still so small-minded and conservative that we can't appreciate the nuances even within the rainbow community. We're not educated enough or
Mm.
willing to be educated. Is probably more
Yeah,
the point.
exactly.
Yeah.
And
So
then you
it
end up
does
with like
dishearten me to see
fear-based
that.
responses.
100%.
Mm.
And just the rhetoric, and that encourages extremism, and which encourages violence, which makes the small amount of safe spaces that we do have down here just a little bit less safe feeling.
Yeah. And I guess it's a weird time at the moment. Like we're less than a week out to the New
Mm,
Zealand election, and this one has felt like particularly strange. And part of me is glad that I'm on
mm,
the other side of the world, even though I did vote by distance.
yeah,
But it is a strange time. Has that felt particularly like poignant to you and your community recently?
it has. It has for me.
Mm,
I am quite well identify as queer now that I've been
mm.
on this journey of self-discovery. Queer and non-binary, I would say my pronouns are probably he, they. I should have said that probably closer to the start. But
Yeah,
I,
sorry.
I
We got there.
feel, no, I skipped that myself. I feel like, yeah, especially when my community is being used to create divisiveness
Mm,
when it comes to election policy and campaigning. I've always been very political. I've always considered myself kind of like an activist, I suppose, in my small way in this tiny corner of the world, as much as I can be, to be a champion for
mm,
queer rights. And I think when my subsection of the country is being used as a tool to try and buy votes, which enacts policy
mm.
which affects my people, it feels very 1975 kind of. I don't know how else to explain it. It feels really
Yeah.
in the same way that we use this whole conversation about race and how that's being used and
Mm,
people of color are being used as a bargaining chip in an election. As we're not voting on policy, we're voting on what's
mm,
going to what's going to allow my rhetoric to fill as much space as possible, is kind of what I feel
mm.
is happening right now, and it creates a massive impending sense of anxiety for me. So I'm like just crossing my fingers, hoping for the best.
Like
Yeah.
all we can do, it makes me so angry because there's so many issues that, yeah, you say are used as a political tool. And to me, I'm like, these are just people trying to exist in the world as who they
Mm,
are. This is
mhm.
how dare you turn this into politics? In my head, it's not politics at all. This is just people living their lives, and then you're then restricting their freedom or trying to,
Yeah.
yeah, use fear to buy votes. Like, how is this
And
politics at all?
not everyday people living their lives either. It's people that have suffered through like
Mm,
like I've suffered, like trying to just be myself. And so what a
yeah,
kick in the guts to have that being used in this race. I've suffered enough. Like why should I be
yeah.
the token of more suffering now?
Like life has already been hard, guys. Can we not?
Give me a break. I'm just trying to mince.
I
I'm gonna
love
get that
that.
tattoo.
Yeah, please do. um, so what does life kind of look and feel like for you now? How has everything changed?
My life now is the most wholesome, and
Aw.
I'm in a space now within my life that after a lot of unpacking and
Mm,
a lot of self work and healing and kind of reconfiguring the way that my brain works, I feel like I've finally got to a
mm,
point in my life that I am 100% comfortable with who I am. I I refuse to look back on my deathbed and think for one single day I wasn't authentically myself. And I
yeah.
know that when I die, I'm not going to have to think that, because every single morning I wake up and I decide that I'm going to go
Mm,
out there, no matter how I'm feeling or what's going on around me, that it's my job and only my job to do me.
yeah.
And so that's what
Oh,
I'm doing.
that's beautiful. Mm. And making that conscious decision because you're right. Like there are years of your life where you didn't feel like you could step out the door as yourself.
Mm. I feel like I've caught up now. After years of being like, of having to fight through it, I finally caught up to where I should have naturally been,
Mm,
which is a beautiful, yeah, beautiful thing.
mm. Has there been any particular like tools or processes or like types of therapy, I guess, that have kind of helped you work through this as terms of like words of wisdom for other people?
Yeah, so for me, I had a brief foray into therapy. I think I
Mm,
have always been quite self-aware, and so I took from
mm,
therapy what I needed to take. I don't feel like, for me personally, I was learning anything that I hadn't already kind of figured out. But I
yeah.
think being so thinking about things on such an intellectual level, I've yeah, it helped to have a
Yeah.
non-biased person kind of like tell me that I was doing good. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
took from that what I would, but I mean, I like to share my story. I also feel like my story isn't anything special. It's not the best. It's not the worst. It's a speck of dust in the ether, you know? I'm one of
Mm,
billions of stories, really. It helps me, and this does sound quite nihilistic, but it helps me to think that we're all meat and muscle and blood and bone and skin and sinew, and we're
mm,
all a small part of the earth that decides to get up and walk around for a little while. And eventually, we're all going to lay down and we're all going to become part of the earth again. And my
yes.
only real job is to try my best to enjoy the walk, you know? It's not my
Oh,
job to stop anybody else from
yeah.
getting up and walking around. If you want to be hateful and bigoted and misogynistic and
Mm,
transphobic and homophobic, and you want to walk with that gait, like that's weird,
mm,
but I'm not going to stop you from doing it. I'm certainly not going to walk beside you,
mm.
which is probably for the best because queer people tend to walk weirdly fast, so they probably wouldn't be able to catch up anyway. But yeah, I
I
think
think
we're
that,
all just born of
yeah,
the earth.
amazing metaphor.
Yeah, so such a good analogy, eh? We're all born of the earth.
Mm,
You, through no choice of your own, you are here. You've got
mm,
what, approximately 76 or so years on average to try and make the most
mm.
of it. Get out there and don't let anybody tell you who you are. Just do it. Live, love, laugh. In that order, respectfully,
Oh, yes, in a respectful way.
of
Um,
course.
I think that's quite a nice place to finish with your lovely metaphor. Live, laugh, mince, maybe.
Mints. Oh, can we change that to live, laugh, mints?
Maybe that's the tattoo.
That's the tat. Oh my god, tramp stamp. Yes.
Ah, right. Oh, it's been amazing chatting to you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, being so open with the world. And I know that this is gonna hopefully change some minds or challenge people's perspectives, or at least like let other people know they're not alone. There will be parts of your story that resonate with so many people, I'm sure.
Mm. It's been an absolute pleasure and thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. If my story does something for anyone, then that's nothing but good news. And yeah,
Yeah.
just be kind to yourself and be kind to everyone else.